Now, I talked to you about these figures before, and I was trying to make, so here's kind of an overview of what I'm attempting to describe to you. So there's one category of representation that has to do with the territory that you inhabit and that you understand. That's primarily social territory, and it tends to be symbolized by masculine and usually like older male symbols. So that's the patriarchal structure. I really think what it is it's a personified representation of the dominance hierarchy structure. So remember the Lion King, you know, the Pride Rock thing? So the Pride Rock is sort of associated with Simba's father, and so that category of symbol is the symbol that I'm talking about. So he used that high place on a mountain as an indicator of dominance structure. You saw that at the opening of the Lion King movie, where all the animals come, they gather around, they all bow before the rock with the king on top of it, and the king, like the lion, is a symbol, generally a symbol of something like solar power, because the lion is a top predator, it's apex predator, and it lives in Africa under the sun, and it has a mane that's sort of like a sun. And then later in the Lion King, we'll actually see this today, you'll see the father lion, Mufasa, yes? He appears in the sky with a solar halo around him. So that's the masculine category. And then the feminine category I told you a bit about is a more chaotic category, and it's a chaotic and plastic category out of which new forms emerge. And then one of the categories that we haven't talked about is the category of the individual. And the individual is the hero in hero stories and is the initiate in initiatory routines. And so the hero is the person who is attempting to become a complete biological and historical entity, personality, so that they're capable not only of adopting independent existence, but of adopting independent existence that's productive, and that's productive in a way that's also of benefit to the community. So it's a particular pattern of development, and that needs to be catalyzed by human societies, because in order for a society to maintain its structure and for the people within it to thrive, the developing individuals have to mature to the point where they can take care of themselves in a way that doesn't disrupt the whole social structure. And so that's the path. It's a natural path for human beings, I would say, to some degree, because we're such intensely social creatures, but because we're also quite malleable and complex and also grounded in history and cultural creatures, it's also something that has to be taught both from the perspective of imitation and explicitly. And so a lot of initiation rites, for example, are predicated on the idea that you take the person out of their childhood context, you destroy their personality, usually as a consequence of some quasi-traumatic encounter, and then you refill them with the cultural norms, and that makes them an adult. And so, you know, to some degree, that's what you guys are doing in a very slow way when you make the transition from high school, say, to university, or the transition from high school to a job. We don't, in our culture, we don't have the kind of abrupt ceremonies, though, that are designed to catalyze that transformation. And, you know, maybe that's an okay thing, and then maybe it's not an okay thing. I mean, one of the things that Freud pointed out, and he's absolutely right about this, is that because human beings have such a long dependency period, it's not that easy for us to grow up. And sometimes it takes a shock in order for that to happen. And so one of the potential problems with having a dependency period as long as the human dependency period is that it never ends, and that you stay immature forever. And really, I believe that that's the central Oedipal problem that Freud talked about, and I believe also that it's a real problem. Now, whether Freud formulated it, you know, with precise accuracy, that's a different story, but, you know, you got to give the guy a break. At least he formulated it, and it's, I mean, I was much more impressed with Freudian Oedipal theorizing after I did clinical work for a long time, because a large number of my patients, their primary problem is getting the hell out of their family. They just can't do it. And so for them, the world is the family. It's the only thing that matters. It's often parental opinion or something like that. They just cannot break free of it. So, you know, initiation ceremonies in part were designed to catalyze that break, so that your mother in particular, but also your father to some degree, were no longer the dominant figures of influence. Your personal mother and father were no longer the dominant figures of influence in your life. So, because really that's what maturation means in some sense, is that when you become an adult, the opinions of your parents are as important as the opinions of any other reasonable people that hypothetically care for you, but no more important than that. So, and I told you about some of the symbolic associations that gather around, say, images of the unknown. You could also think of the unknown as unexplored territory, but it's a tricky kind of territory, because if the person beside you does something spectacularly weird, you move from explored territory to unexplored territory as soon as you don't understand what they're doing. So it's not exactly spatial territory. It's more like temporospatial territory. It's time and space, because the same place can be a different place from one moment to the next. And that happens all the time when some event that you don't expect occurs in the place that you are. So, and your body is prepared to react. It's instinctively prepared to react to the emergence of chaotic circumstances. It basically does that by hyperactivating your preparation for action and increasing your capacity to pay attention and preparing you to do a very large number of things at once because you don't know what to do. It's a high stress reaction, but it's built into you, and it's so interesting because what that means that is part of what's built into people is the ability to deal with what they don't understand, which is a real paradox, right? Because how can you deal with what you don't understand? You don't understand it. So, but the answer is, well, you ramp up your ability to react in a very large number of ways, and you do that by increasing your general level of arousal and your attention. And it's a good, that also increases the probability that you're going to be attentive to new information and pull it in and utilize it so that you can decide how to act rapidly. So, other things happen. For example, you know, some of you may have been in car accidents or events like that where you knew for a few seconds that the event was going to occur and time slowed down. It's quite a commonly reported phenomenon. I've experienced it a number of times actually, and it was actually experimentally tested. They threw people off bungee cord apparatuses, you know, so they were plummeting down, you know, in a quite frightening manner, and had them look at digital timers that were flashing information while they were falling, and it turned out that the people who were falling could process the digital information faster than people who were just standing there under normal circumstances. How they got that past an ethics committee is beyond me, but it's a brilliant, it really is a brilliant experiment. So I went through some of the symbolism of the unknown. I want to go through some of the symbolism that's associated with the known today, so give you some sense. Flags are definitely patriarchal symbols. They're cultural symbols. And here's some, I'll just lay out a variety of terms, and so that'll give you some indication of the network of associations that's associated with the symbol of the dominance hierarchy, fundamentally. Culture, Apollonian control, that's after Apollo, the god. Superego, the conscious, the king, the patriarch, the plow, because the plow opens up the earth, the phallus, order and authority and the crushing weight of tradition, the wise old man and the tyrant, dogma, the day sky, the countryman, the island, the heights, the ancestral spirits, and the activity of the dead. Now, these symbolic realms are kind of, they're situationally transformable. So if you look across cultures, very frequently in stories you see characters that exemplify each of these categories, but the characters can shift to some degree, for example. So often, if the story involves the ocean and an island, then the ocean will be feminine and the island will be masculine. But if the story utilizes an island and the air, then the island will be feminine and the air will be masculine. So it isn't as if there's a one-to-one correspondence between the entities in the story and these archetypal categories, because their definition depends on, they can't be defined in isolation. So it's sort of like, this is a really stupid example, but it's the best one I can come up with at the moment. If you're trying to interpret statistics, you can't understand what a given statistic means unless you know the number of people in the experiment, the effect size, and the probability that that effect size is, that it emerged at a better than chance level. Any of those pieces of information without the other two are actually meaningless. And it's the same situation here. You have to have the representation of culture, and you have to have the representation of nature, and you have to have the representation of the individual. And then you can figure out what entities are being used in those different categories, even though there's some similarity across stories, which is partly why you could actually understand stories, right? Because if there was no similarity across them, then you wouldn't be able to understand them.